Back in April, right after it became official, the Arizona National Hockey League franchise was coming to Utah. The team's owner, Ryan Smith, held a news conference. The governor was there, the Salt Lake City mayor was there, the president of the University of Utah, a member of the LDS Church's 12 Apostles, members of the state legislature. And here's what Smith said. I've never seen so many Republicans and Democrats and religious and educational leaders all on the same page before. The same page. Now, he didn't mean they were all pro-hockey fans. I mean, they might all be hockey fans, but that's not what he was talking about. Smith was talking about a massive development project to redesign and overhaul the 2 or 3 city blocks in the core of downtown Salt Lake. Our producer Benjamin Bombard says this whole story begins a few years ago as Smith was thinking about how to expand his sports empire.
And at some point he gets interested in this idea of a sports and entertainment district, a real estate development around an arena usually. And at more or less the same time, Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall and members of the Downtown Alliance, a group of concerned business owners in downtown Salt Lake City, are also thinking about this same idea, this sports and entertainment district, and thinking about how something like that might work in Salt Lake City. Fast forward to spring of 2024. Ryan Smith has been in touch with NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman, says he wants an expansion team here in Salt Lake City. And all of a sudden manages to purchase the Arizona Coyotes, and he's going to move them to Salt Lake City. Initially, he wants to build this district down in the south end of the valley, probably at point of the mountain where the former Utah prison site used to be, which is now just open ground. So it's at this point that Salt Lake City leaders start to worry that they could lose the Utah Jazz, lose them to the suburbs. So why would they be worried about that? Well, we know Ryan Smith wanted the hockey team's arena to be outside of Salt Lake City. And a lot of these owners, they don't want to maintain and pay for 2 different stadiums. Plus, this kind of thing has happened before, where the owner of the local pro sports team wants a new stadium or wants to make improvements on an old one, and they sort of threaten, hey, if the city can't help me out with this, I might just have to move the team. And it should be said that Ryan Smith hasn't yet made this threat that we know of. But Salt Lake City leaders, they're still worried that this could happen. And so Salt Lake City and local elected leaders say, we'll help out. If you want to build this thing, if you want to do it around the Delta Center in downtown Salt Lake City, we're willing to consider pitching in perhaps in excess of $1 billion in tax subsidies to make it happen. Then in late March, early April, representatives from Smith Entertainment Group reach out to state and local elected leaders and say, hey, let's go check one of these things out. Let's go see what one of these sports and entertainment districts looks like. And there are a couple nearby that had caught Ryan Smith's interest. There's LA Live in Los Angeles. And this is an area that was a formerly blighted part of LA. And the billionaire owner of the Lakers and the Kings said, I want to build this sports and entertainment district here. And I spoke with an LA Times reporter who followed LA Live from its inception through to its completion, and several years afterward wrote an article that described how LA Live had led to a real resurgence in downtown Los Angeles. So Ryan Smith says, let's go check this out. He invites Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall, Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson, Salt Lake City Council Chair Victoria Petro, Utah Senate President Stuart Adams, and it's a whirlwind tour. They're only on the ground for 6 hours. And Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall, she was impressed. She thought it was beautiful. She thought it was incredibly walkable and vibrant, and she could really see something like that in downtown Salt Lake City with the unique fingerprint of this place on it. So something like this sports and entertainment district seems very likely to happen here in Salt Lake City. And the reason that is the case is because Ryan Smith got an NHL team. But the question is, does this pencil out for Salt Lake City, for the county, for taxpayers who could be on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars to bring this project to life?
This is Radio West. I'm Doug Fabrizio. Today in the program, we're talking about this new sports district proposed for downtown Salt Lake City. And I should say up front that what comes to mind for a lot of you is Abravanel Hall and some of the older buildings inside that development zone. Now, we're going to be talking about Abravanel Hall in the coming weeks, but we wanted to start with some basics. Where did this idea for a sports and entertainment multiplex come from? Should the public help pay for it? Do these developments actually drive economic activity? You know, are they worth it for taxpayers? We asked Robert Gerke to give us some background, and we started with the person at the center of all of this, Ryan Smith.
He's sort of the quintessential tech bro, isn't he? I mean, he came out of BYU, and when he was at BYU, he and his brother started this company, Qualtrics, which is sort of a survey platform. They were making a bunch of money on it, and then they sold it off for billions. And so, you know, he's young and he's got all this money. He's a big sports fan and started acquiring teams. You know, purchased the interest in the Utah Jazz from the Miller family, picked up RSL. Now he's got this hockey team. He's become sort of Utah's version of Mark Cuban, maybe. And so, yeah, and he's ambitious, and I think wants to really see these teams grow.
Okay, so let's talk about this sports district. And I wanted to back up and talk about his original vision for it, because it's quite different from the thing that we're going to be talking about today. What do we know about his original? I know that he went to Los Angeles, was somewhat taken by a project there called the LA Live district in Los Angeles. What do we know about his original scheme? Yeah,
I mean, just within the last 6 months, this hockey thing became went from being conceptual to very much a reality, right? Yeah. And so when it was in the conceptual stages, the idea was get the pieces in place so you can go to the NHL and make a pitch for an expansion team. And by all accounts, everything that we had heard at that point was that he wanted it in the south end of the valley, Sandy, Draper, maybe even northern Utah County. And the reason for that is because if you look at the data, roughly 70% of the tickets sold for Delta Center events are sold to people south of Murray. Right. And you're right. The LA Live thing has sort of served as the model for this. He took Mayor Mendenhall out there to kind of see what the concept was and say, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this in Salt Lake City? But the notion of putting it in the south end of the valley, though, shifted pretty dramatically during the legislative session, because you had this concern that, okay, if he's got a new stadium in the south end of the valley and the Delta Center needs renovations, or the ticket sales are lagging or whatever, it makes it really easy to pull the Jazz out of the Delta Center in downtown Salt Lake and put them in this new stadium, a dual-use stadium. And what that would leave you with is this husk of a building on the west end of the city, and not much of an attraction to draw people in. And that was something that, in particular, Senate President Stuart Adams was just not willing to go along with. It wasn't put this directly, but the message was basically, if you want it down there, you can pay for it down there, right? And so, there was consideration given to that, to Ryan Smith and SEG paying for this themselves and building it where they want it. But if you put it in downtown Salt Lake City, if you revitalize the district, we'll come up with taxpayer funds to help you pay for it. To help move the project along, absolutely. And so that's what we ended up with. Even at that point, though, I don't think anybody was expecting the hockey team to materialize so quickly. But
that was the clincher, I guess.
It was kind of the clincher because Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, said that having these pieces in place made it a lot easier for them to do that. It's moved things along expeditiously, shall we say?
So the original vision is some grand chunk of land in the south end of the valley, but now he's shifted to something that has become this. Basically a revitalization project for downtown Salt Lake City. So it's so now it seems like the conversation is quite different.
Well, let's talk about why it's so good to put it in the south end of the valley too, because like you said, a blank piece of land, the money is not necessarily made on the stadium itself. It's made on everything that would surround the stadium. Yeah. And so when you compare putting it in Sandy, say, where you can acquire a lot of the land around it, you can develop it for housing, mixed use, all of that stuff. That's where the real money comes into this, the real profit. When you put it in downtown Salt Lake, if you put it in the Delta Center, you're kind of hemmed in. You've got the gateway, and you've got an interstate, you've got church land that's on the other side. You've got a Bravenel Hall and the county Salt Palace. And so you're kind of hemmed in terms of developable land. So that's why the south end of the valley was so much more attractive from a business standpoint.
But okay, then why would Smith bite on the idea of doing it downtown if it's so much better in the south end of the valley?
Well, and so then you've got all of this state and local money coming in that subsidizes these projects. He doesn't have to pay for it all himself. Yeah. Plus, he got a lot of buy-in from the legislature and frankly the city in terms of what they're willing to do to accommodate the growth. I mean, the right now. Again, things are still developing, sure. but the zoning application alone, for example, they want to remove all the height restrictions on the buildings on the blocks surrounding the Delta Center, which opens up a lot of opportunities for you can't build out like you might be able to in the south end of the valley, but you can definitely build up at that point. And so, there is potential there for rapid development. There's the big subsidy, obviously. They're willing to open up. It looks like First South to create a flow there that's going to make things a lot more appealing. You also have, I think, the LDS Church because they own so much land, because they put so much money into the area around there. I think there's an interest there from them to have it down there as well.
I want to come back to your reference to the LDS Church being interested and involved, because there are a lot of big players here that are supporting the project. Mayor Mendenhall, Mayor Jenny Wilson of the county, of course, the University of Utah has been supportive, and the church itself, I think, is really interesting. And LDS Apostle even attended one of these news conferences at the Delta Center, which, I think is a show of support.
Pretty strong signal, right?
Yeah. And we should also mention that the church has agreed to loosen some liquor laws, bars near community centers, which also says something. So what can you say about that?
It's kind of hard to think of anyone who has more at stake in the vibrancy of downtown Salt Lake than the LDS Church. I mean, they not only do they, it's their headquarters, it's their iconic Temple Square, it's the City Creek Mall, it's all of these things, and all of the money that they put into developing that area, and all the money they're planning to put into developing that area. And so I think they probably had a vested interest. The fact that, as you mentioned, they send this general authority to the news conference, I think, is a signal that they're on board with this too. They, as the church often does, they mostly have stayed behind the scenes on this. But the loosening of the liquor laws you mentioned, I mean, that's. In this district, they're basically waiving the proximity rules, and you've got to
which they haven't done very much.
Which they've loosened them a little bit downtown, but they've whenever liquor laws get changed in this state, it's usually with the at least tacit approval of the church, and so you have the potential for having this bar district essentially within spitting distance of the church's mall and the church's headquarters, which is a fascinating dynamic, I think, and probably a signal that they are invested in this as well.
One of the stories that you reported with your colleagues says this. It says, "At stake is the future of the heart of Utah's capital." What does that mean? I guess the question for me is, does downtown Salt Lake City, at least, does it really need a revitalization project? Now, I'm talking about the downtown part of it. In the debate over all of this, I've heard the comment that, look, there are a lot of parts of Salt Lake City and the county that need revitalization, but it's not really downtown, or is it? I mean, what do you make of that question?
Yeah, it was interesting listening to the legislative debate on this, and some of the lawmakers who weren't from the Salt Lake Valley were, really down on Salt Lake. The way they talk, it's sort of like Mad Max Furiosa, right? And so, and it's not like that. But you talk to Erin Mendenhall, who obviously has a different impression of her city. This is an opportunity for them to take on some projects that they would never have been able to do before. And so, like I mentioned, opening up First South, reconfiguring the Salt Palace so you have a flow of traffic. You don't have that big barrier that blocks everything off. That's something that, they would maybe have liked to have done at some point, but the financing and the practicality of it wasn't there. So it there is that potential to sort of reimagine parts of the city, that maybe were neglected before. But then, I talked to Rusty Cannon from the Utah Taxpayers Association recently, and he was talking, kind of contrasting the sports district for the hockey arena, right, with the Miller Ballpark district, right, we're over on North Temple. Right. And he's like, it makes more sense from his standpoint to put the money into the North Temple district because you have a lot more blight and dilapidation, and it needs the money. It needs the attention. And so, you're not necessarily going to, in this sports district, turn it from a hellscape to a wonderland, right? It's already not bad as it is.
That's Robert Gerke of the Salt Lake Tribune. We'll take a break and come back in a moment. You're listening to Radio West. This is Radio West. I'm Doug Fabrizio. When the Utah Jazz owner Ryan Smith first thought about buying an NHL franchise, he didn't think his team would play in downtown Salt Lake City. He said he had in mind a blank piece of land down south. In this vision, his hockey arena would be the centerpiece of a much larger development, 100-plus acres with 5,000 or so housing units and all the shops and infrastructure to support it. But that's not what happened, of course. And early next month, the Salt Lake City Council is set to approve the public financing part of an ambitious development project that will dramatically reshape the core of downtown. Today in the program, we're talking about it, the first in a series of conversations. Robert Gerke of the Salt Lake Tribune is with us. So one of the big questions here now is just how much taxpayers are on the hook for this Ryan Smith's vision for this sports district. Talk a little bit about that, like and of course we should maybe just be specific about the actual taxes here. We're talking about sales taxes for Salt Lake City residents. Yeah,
I guess the short answer is we don't really know yet how much is going to be in play because there's the sales tax piece. The city gets to has the option to raise its sales tax. It looks like they're moving in that direction to raise the sales tax to generate $54 million a year that would go to this project. On top of that, the Smith Group is talking about wanting some tax increment financing, which is a little complicated, but basically they get to keep a portion of the tax on the new economic growth, the tax on the new economic growth that's generated by this, which is something that the Miller Group got with its Fair Park district. So we don't know how much that's going to be, and we don't know how much that's going to be used for. But we know more about the $54 million for the sales tax increase. That would be money that would be used to pay off bonds that would be issued to finance the physical part of the project. The Smith Group has said they are going to limit their public subsidy for their public investment in the Delta Center to $900 million. Originally, that was in the legislation. It was taken out of the legislation, but they say they're still committing to that. If you talk about $54 million over the life of a 30-year bond, you can kind of get a sense of what you're looking at in about $1.5 billion or more dollars at play here. Then you talk about other potential state investment in trying to reconfigure the Salt Palace. So there are other moving pieces that we don't know yet.
You mentioned where you said it's basically going to cost, for the average Salt Lake City household, a monthly Netflix subscription. That's the equivalent.
Yeah.
Or this is how you put it too, or a large pizza.
Yeah. Well, if you get good pizza.
Yeah. That's right. But is that a deal? I get that for most taxpayers. What do you get for that Netflix subscription? Because, and I think this is the way a lot of people are going to be thinking about this. I guess this is kind of how I'm thinking about it. If it costs $15 for a hot dog to go to a Jazz game, or I imagine the equivalent of that to go to a hockey game.
Yeah.
It's cost a lot of money to take your family to any of these events. Does that, and some can afford that, but a lot of this average Salt Lake City household can't. So what do they get for that?
I mean, that was exactly why I thought it was important to kind of try to put a figure on it. The city hasn't released its official figures. This was sort of back of the napkin math, right?
Yeah.
Because the legislature said, okay, it's going to bring in $54 million. According to the city, most of that is paid by people from outside of Salt Lake City who come in for work or for shopping or for dinner or that sort of thing. So what was left was based on just under 100,000 households in the city, it comes to about $220 a year or $18 a month. Right. But yeah, I mean the important part of that question is, what do they get? You don't get free tickets, you don't get a discount on the ticket, you don't get to be part owner of the team like you do in Green Bay, I guess. So you end up, you arguably get sort of the secondary benefits of, the nightlife, that sort of thing. You get some improvements perhaps to the roads and so forth. If it's bringing more money in, then the city would potentially have more money to spend on these secondary things like affordable housing. That's one of the things that a lot of the advocacy groups are pushing really hard is, okay, if we're going to give them these concessions on, say, the height restrictions, right? If they're putting housing in there, they want at least 20% of that to be affordable housing, which would potentially be a boon for those low-income people who are going to have the hardest time paying that $220 a year, right? But you're right. I mean, the average hockey ticket, and obviously there's a wide range on them, is about $100.
Yeah.
So if you got a family of 4 or 5 in Utah, you're going to still be paying $500 to get in the door. So it's not necessarily something for everyone. It's and that's been the big criticism of it, frankly, is like, why are we giving billions to billionaires so millionaires can go watch games? It's somewhat inaccessible and unattainable. So the Smith Group would argue, I think, that they don't just invest in the area, but they also, we've seen it with like the junior jazz program, right? Something that a lot of kids, I grew up playing junior jazz, and it's something that a lot of kids would probably benefit from if they have a youth hockey program, things like that. But
here's another skeptical question, though.
Sure.
Okay, great, but he's not doing it to beef up the junior jazz program. How much money is Ryan Smith going to make and his partners? In your reporting, for example, you've mentioned that the Atlanta Braves, they have a sports district. They're making nearly $60 million a year off of that. Any idea what Ryan Smith will make?
I mean, that's so hard to say because these professional sports franchises end up being some of the best investments you can possibly have. I mean, we saw Mark Cuban sold off part of his ownership in the Dallas Mavericks, and I think he made something like in the neighborhood of, well, I think it was billions of dollars that he sold it for just part of his. So it kind of depends on how the teams perform, I guess, and how but he's going to make a lot of money. So it starts off as a project in the south end of the valley, ends up being a project that could
I'll use the word again, revitalized the downtown part of Salt Lake City. Could this end up being a pretty good deal for taxpayers, as you said, economically and even culturally? I mean, they're renovating the Delta Center, possibly the Bravenel Hall, renovating the Salt Palace, getting more downtown gathering space. Could you pencil it out for it being a good deal?
I mean, you're asking the right questions because we arguably could have renovated the Delta Center and reconfigured the Salt Palace without the hockey team coming, right?
Yeah.
One didn't depend on the other,
Yeah.
and so it's still taxpayer money that's going into to bankrolling this. The Smith Group says that they are going to put about $3 billion of their own money into these developments. That's a huge investment in the heart of downtown. So I think there is the potential that people could see benefits from that. The average Utahn could see benefits from that. Will it pencil out? Every economic study done for the last 30 years says no, that it will be at best net neutral, but possibly a net negative in the long run. There is money that's going to be invested, for example, in the transportation, the walkability of downtown, the public safety, those homelessness. Part of the legislation requires them to have a plan for dealing with homelessness. So all of that is probably a positive. But again, the economists typically say that no, these aren't a good deal for the cities that put up the money, and the benefits are often outweighed by the costs.
You mentioned before that a lot of this is still sort of in the, drawing on a napkin phase. So what don't we know?
So the Smith Group has a master planner that's working on their overall concept that they're going to try to get to the city with their participation agreement. That's kind of the next step. And we haven't seen much of that. The legislation allows for up to 100 acres, which is roughly 10 blocks. They're talking about 3 blocks. Is the final product going to be larger than that? We don't know how much money that they're going to be asking for these different pieces. There's talk about putting, for example, Third West, putting that underground, right? And then opening up that whole area as a pedestrian plaza, building mixed use, that sort of thing. The Olympic Medals Plaza, they're talking about putting down there. So a lot of this, it remains to be seen. I know you talk to anybody who's involved in Japantown, which was this, one of the largest Japanese enclaves in the country at one point. Now is kind of withered to just a couple churches and a garden. They're worried because they're right in the center of this district that they're looking at. So, what's going to happen there? Who's going to pay to open up the First South line? I mean, we haven't seen estimates on that, but I've been told it would be over $1 billion to, reconfigure the Delta Center, basically drive that road right through it. It's not an easy thing to do. And then they want to, if they add to that, if they want to put Third West underground, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, according to the UDOT. And also one of the main arterials. There's so many moving pieces that we just don't know yet. And is the city council going to go along with other requests that the Smith Group wants? Victoria,
but they're going to be making a vote just next month.
They don't have much time. I mean, and Council Chair Victoria Petro said that she's not inclined to, give them carte blanche on the building height thing, on the zoning. And so, there's still a lot of negotiations to be had, and it's happening very quickly. The legislature set this up so the whole thing basically has to be in place no later than September 1st. And so you can see them kind of in a mad scramble now to get the I's dotted and T's crossed.
Ryan Smith was quoted in your paper as saying, if you're expecting perfection, you're looking at the wrong people. But if we didn't make this bet and we were perfect, we would not be here. So it's like, this is a bet for us.
It's a pretty good way to approach it, right? I mean, because he's not promising that thing's going to go without a hitch. This is the beginning of a process that's going to take several years. So it's the beginning of a process, and it's not going to be. We're not going to see the final product for years and years.
Robert Gerke, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Robert Gerke of the Salt Lake Tribune. There's been some question about whether a final vote on this project by the Salt Lake City Council will be delayed, but as of right now, that vote has been scheduled for July 2nd. There will be a public hearing next Tuesday. We'll put more information about that on our website, radiowest.org. We'll take another break. Come back in a moment. You're listening to Radio West. This is Radio West. I'm Doug Fabrizio. Today in the program, we've been talking about this several billion-dollar sports and entertainment district planned for downtown Salt Lake City, anchored by the Utah Jazz and the new NHL franchise. So, if a billionaire wants to build a stadium for the professional sports team he bought, and he wants to spend his own money, that's one thing. But when you ask taxpayers to help you pay for the enterprise, that's something else, because then you have to justify it in a different way, which means bigger questions about public space and urban planning and the involvement of lawmakers and local officials. And that's where we are now with Ryan Smith's proposal. But are these kinds of developments actually worth it for taxpayers? Our producer, Benjamin Bombard, has been looking into the question. Okay, so there's this distinction we need to make for listeners so this conversation makes sense. In the past, when people have evaluated, the benefit for cities and taxpayers of these sports teams, it's been based in the past on one facility, one stadium, or one arena, right?
Yeah, the way these projects have almost entirely been done in the past is that they build a stadium.
Yeah.
And that's it. You build the stadium, you build the parking for the stadium, you put it somewhere, and you hope that it produces economic benefits for the owner and the surrounding city.
And the argument has been that it will be a benefit, but what does the economic research actually tell us about this model? Let's call it the one stadium model. Does it, as we've been saying, pencil out?
It does not pencil out. And the research is unequivocal on that fact. The one stadium model where a billionaire owner goes to a city, says, hey, I want to bring a sports franchise here, or we need a new stadium. The old one isn't working anymore. You got to help out. When a city kicks in any amount of money, usually you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It could be in the billions. They don't see a very strong return on investment on that. It just does not pencil out from a public policy standpoint to support these kinds of single stadium builds for pro sports franchises.
And you've looked at this study after study after study.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find one instance where anybody, even the proponents of it, will say that this actually works from a public policy standpoint. It just doesn't.
But what's being proposed by Ryan Smith is different from the one stadium model. It's not one big building. It's kind of a bunch of buildings, right? So explain the difference here.
Yeah. So what we've seen it's probably like the last 15 years or so, is the emergence of a new model for pro sports developments that incorporate the arena inside a larger district that also has shops, apartments, mixed-use development with a convention center sometimes. There may be an arts facility. They don't always involve a sports stadium. In Nashville, there's a similar district like this, but there's no sports involved because it's such a music town. So they have built their district around their arts and entertainment. Yeah. But they're big developments, and often there is a stadium at the center of them. And
I love the way economists describe it because it sounds so economist-y. Agglomeration economies.
Yeah. You're pulling all these businesses and all these uses into one place.
asset anchored developments.
Yeah, arena anchored development.
Yeah. Okay, so talk more about, so as you said, over the last 15 years or so, these kinds of projects have started to emerge. I liked this question you were asking this week. Like, is there a patient zero for this? We've talked about LA Live being one, but mention some others, because there are a lot of these now around the country.
Yeah, there are a number of them. The people that I spoke with pointed to two as potentially like the patient zeros, the one who started it all. And it's either LA Live or it's this place called Jerry World in Dallas. Jerry Jones is the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and there's this district that was built around the stadium where the Dallas Cowboys play. So those are kind of pointed at as the original kind of templates for the sports and entertainment district model, which there's one in Atlanta where the Braves play. There's one in Cleveland where the Cavaliers and the Cleveland Guardians of the Major League Baseball play. There's one up in Edmonton where the Oilers play. There's currently one under development in Calgary, and there's one currently under development in Inglewood, California, where the Clippers will be playing at the new Intuit Dome there.
So they're popping up all over.
Yeah. One of the questions I had going into this research and into producing the show was like, is this a new model? Is the old way of building a single stadium kind of going by the wayside? And if so, why?
Well, it seems like this is a new model, right?
I think we can say that is the case right now. These developments are popping up all over the country. I forgot to mention Las Vegas around Allegiant Stadium, the A's, which are being relocated to Las Vegas from Oakland. They're looking at a similar development around there. Wherever we see major stadium developments going up like this, there are some exceptions, but by and large, they are centered in these sports and entertainment districts, which I think is like the most succinct way to describe these things. Yeah. One of the principals for Smith Entertainment Group, the group that's owned by Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, he said that what they're trying to build here in Salt Lake City is a sports, entertainment, arts, and convention district, which is just a mouthful. So sports and entertainment district is a good way to describe these things.
So we know, Ben, that the old model of having the public pay for a stadium, that doesn't return the investment. It doesn't work out. Pretty much never has. So here's the big question. Will this new template, will this new model be different? And remind us, how much are taxpayers going to be paying for Ryan Smith's new sports district?
So that still remains to be determined. The Salt Lake City Council right now has before them a decision to approve a 0.5% sales tax increase in the city. And the people who have crunched the numbers say that will amount to, it's between $900 million and $1.2 billion, I believe. If you average that out across Salt Lake City households, it's about $220 per household per year. And Smith Entertainment Group, in their application to be the ones to develop this region, this district, have asked for 30 years to keep that sales tax increase for 30 years. That's what that $1.2 billion number is. So every household in Utah will be paying through their sales tax the equivalent of $220 every year for 30 years.
Yeah. Okay, so you've been talking to economists to get at the question of whether or not this new model will benefit taxpayers. So let's discuss what you found. And maybe we should start with the reasons the model might not be so good for a community or even fair for a community. Who did you talk to about this?
So I spoke with Dennis Coates. He's a sports economist at the University of Maryland, and you'll find his name on any number of papers looking at this single stadium build model and finding that it just doesn't pencil out. Yeah. He's done a lot of this research through the years. And he says that these sports and entertainment districts, they're not all that different. What they do...
He says they're not different. This new model is not that different from the old model?
No, it's not all that different from the old model in that... So what happens is you've got this sports and entertainment district, and people are going to be going there and spending their money, okay? So all they do is they relocate economic activity and people gathering. Yeah. So what Dennis Coates told me is that rather than going to their neighborhood burger shop or the taco shop or to the bar down the street, and spending their money there and gathering there and creating a sense of community there, they're going to be going down to this Salt Lake Sports and Entertainment District.
Because it's happening and it's vibrant and there's all this stuff going on and there's a concert thing and there's, right?
Yeah, I'm going there. We're going to go there. We're going to go see the Jazz play.
Yeah.
Instead of going to the burger shop around the corner, we'll go and get a burger down at the Sports and Entertainment District before we go to the game.
So he's saying that these projects don't create new economic activity outside of that district. And in fact, they draw money out of it. They suck money out of those places.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like also what Coates is arguing is, why do we need to focus on the urban core to make a place healthy? Like, why does downtown get so much of the attention when you've got all these other places that could use development money? The suburbs and other parts of the city. It's like, who should be more deserving of this economic activity? And it seems like the decision here is the focus should be downtown. That's a decision that you're making with this new template model. Is that right?
I think that the decision makers, the elected officials that have this choice before them are mostly due to make out on this. Salt Lake City, you consider Mayor Erin Mendenhall. Mm-hmm. Her city stands to gain a significant influx of spending and gathering. It stands to be more vibrant. So
but the mayor of Ogden is not having a say here.
Yes, exactly. The mayor of Ogden doesn't have a say. You may find that different members of the city council have different opinions, but council person and chairwoman Victoria Petro may look at this and say, hey, this development will be in my district, District 1. We could use a lot of this money. We could use a lot more economic activity in my district. This could be a real boon to us. So they may not be considering the totality of the economic activity that they're relocating here.
Okay, so let's talk about what might be the advantages for a sports district like this. You also talked to another economist who's thinking about this in a kind of a different way. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Mark Rosentraub is another sports economist. He's at the University of Michigan. And Rosentraub has been on the ground floor helping get a lot of these projects made across the country. He was intimately involved in the development of Allegiant Stadium. He made numerous public presentations demonstrating the financial viability of that project there, and he does the same elsewhere. And all of his work is very open source. He says that transparency is incredibly important in this process. And Rosentraub is very bullish on the opportunities for these sports and entertainment districts to return investment for everybody involved, including municipalities. So
let's talk about how he can say that, because what Rosentraub seems to be saying, because he seems to agree with Dennis Coates, that these sports districts do actually redistribute economic activity.
Yeah, he doesn't disagree on that fact at all.
Okay.
It's actually one of the first things he mentioned when we spoke.
He's like, yes, I grant that.
That's allowed, yeah.
But he says, but that's not such a bad thing. Explain.
Yeah, so he says that, so you think of where pro sports franchises are usually located. They're usually located in the economic engines of a state, usually in densely populated urban areas. Yeah. LA, Denver, Houston, Salt Lake now.
Of course.
And those places often have greater economic diversity. They often have greater ethnic diversity. And they have to provide a lot of services. They're much more densely populated as well, so they have to provide a lot of services to a lot of people. And if those cities can realize increased tax revenue off of a project like this, they stand to be able to provide better services across the board. It further enriches the general fund.
So Rosentraub is saying, don't think about the small taco shops and burger joints losing out necessarily. Think of the bigger picture. Think about the tax money that's being generated by these sports districts in this other place, and your community, even though it's not centered there near the district, is going to get better services and more tax money just as a result of them doing well downtown. Is that right?
Provided you're within the city or county that is benefiting from that additional tax revenue.
Yeah. So what kind of support are these billionaire developers getting from city and state leaders around the country? Dennis Coates said that you were starting to see more and more of these projects because they're easy to sell to elected officials.
I don't know the exact numbers that they're getting. It's got to be in the hundreds of millions. And it's probably verging into $1 billion or more for each of these builds because they're not cheap. You're developing an entire district. You're not just building a stadium. Yeah. You're developing an entire mixed-use district as well. And these may be easier to sell because there is actually return on investment. As Mark Rosentraub told me, the city stands to make actually finally to realize some real public benefits from their investment in an arena-centered area. And, I mean, sports aren't going anywhere. Pro sports aren't going anywhere. So these things are going to get built somewhere. And, you know, if you're Mayor Aaron Mendenhall, you don't want to lose the Utah Jazz. You don't want to sully your reputation in an election year. Yeah. You stand a lot to benefit, and you probably get your name on a plaque at the district when it's built, thanks to Aaron Mendenhall and all these other, elected worthies.
So there are a lot of incentives for elected leaders.
Yes.
But it seems like this was a question that you asked, which I think is a good one. Would it be less likely that a project like this would be built if you put it to a public vote versus just going through elected leaders? Because that's what's happening here. Voters are not going to have a say on this. But what was the answer that you got?
There seems to be some reason to believe that it's true that if you put it to popular referendum, you stand less of a chance of getting it through because of the investment and the onus that elected leaders have to put on that decision to either lose a sports team or provide, a 0.5% sales tax increase, which sounds minor, right? It does add up to a significant chunk of change.
So what can we say right now? It sounds like for the first model, just the single stadium model, we can be pretty confident to say that does not pencil out. But what can we say about the new template right now? Have these sports districts paid off? Do they work? And is it too early to say?
I don't think it is too early to say. I think we can say that if you do it right, as Mark Rosentraub told me, he doesn't do these projects, and he's done a number of them, as I mentioned. He doesn't do these projects if they're going to lose money. He doesn't want to be involved in that. He said, if it's going to lose, I don't want any part of it. So, just based on the way he tells it, all his projects that he's worked on are producing investment for everybody involved. And I should say that Ryan Smith is offering $3 billion of his own dollars because he's just doing it out of the goodness of his heart to give a gift to Salt Lake City. He expects a return on investment. And what Mark Rosentraub is saying is like, you know what? Not only will the billionaire get a return on investment, but the city and the taxpayers will as well.
Is it worth it if you're a Salt Lake City resident?
I mean, everybody's going to have to make their own decision on that. In the end, it won't be up to us. One way to think about it is it worth it to me to have the Utah Jazz around and a new NHL hockey team here, whether or not I follow them, even if I do, and I'm paying $220 more a year just to have them? And you could also look at the flip side of that. It's $220 a year, but am I going to have better services? Are my potholes going to be filled in better? Is the trash pickup going to be reliable? Is the snow plows are going to be, I won't get stuck in my driveway or whatever. So another thing Mark Rosentraub told me is that he would advise leaders in Salt Lake City and those tasked with deciding whether or not we should move forward with this, and SEG as well, with putting all the cards on the table. He says that transparency is incredibly important to this process. So I would say that we can't really evaluate yet whether this is worth it to us because we just don't know enough. We don't know what this is going to look like. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know what the return on the investment is for the city or for Ryan Smith and whether or not we're going to be comfortable with that as taxpayers. So we need a lot more information before we can decide whether this is worth it for us.
Benjamin Bombard, thanks very much.
Thanks, Doug.
That's our producer, Benjamin Bombard. There seems to be some discussion going on right now about whether a final vote on the project by the Salt Lake City Council should be postponed. But right now, that vote has been scheduled for July 2nd. There will be a public hearing next Tuesday. We'll put more information on our website, radiowest.org. Radio West is a production of KUER. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And join us tomorrow when the writer and linguist Amanda Montell will join us to talk about what it means to overthink everything. The program is produced by Benjamin Bombard and Tim Slover. Carrie Watson is our executive producer. I'm Doug Fabrizio.